Oh, thanks very much, Hisham. Thanks for having me. Someone pulled out, though. That's why I'm on doing the keynote, you see. This is like my theory about my career. I just turn up and other people pull out, and slowly but surely I can climb the dizzy heights of politics. It's a great way forward for anyone that wants to get involved in politics. 90% of success is showing up. The other 5% is other people not turning up. Okay. So I've got 15 minutes to tell you a quick story about how I think politics is changing and why it matters, and I thought I would do it with reference to our good friends at Cambridge Analytica. You all are familiar, roughly, with the Cambridge Analytica story, are you not, given you're here? I mean, of course, it's been in the news all the time. Well, I covered this story for the BBC 18 months ago, and no one paid any attention to it. I'm not bitter about that, honestly, it's totally fine. I'm glad the Observer's getting all the credit. But I did, in fact, interview Alexander Nix 18 months ago and the people running Donald Trump's digital campaigns in San Antonio, Texas. And most of what has been reported about Cambridge Analytica, we already covered. And I think the way the story of Cambridge Analytica has been talked about is almost entirely wrong, highly misleading and unhelpful. I want to tell you what I think happened and why it matters. So the story that you may have heard, roughly speaking, is that Cambridge Analytica, using some magic psychological warfare tool developed by Steve Bannon, managed to trick millions of people who would have voted for Hillary Clinton into voting for Donald Trump instead because they saw some Facebook adverts. Now, forget Brexit because they didn't really work on Brexit. But does that not strike you as slightly unlikely? I mean, does anyone ever feel like they've had their minds changed by a Facebook advert? I mean, does anyone even work in digital advertising here? Wouldn't it be brilliant if you could send out some adverts and change millions of people's minds? No, this is not quite what happened. But it's still very important. In fact, I think it's more important than it's generally understood. So what Cambridge Analytica did, one of many companies that have done basically the same thing, is over several months, couple of years, they collected or bought from commercially available data sources 5,000 data points on 250 million Americans. Credit record, gun ownership, car ownership, mortgage scores, what magazines they subscribed to, what websites they visited, to build up a profile on those 250 million Americans. Standard stuff, lots of people doing it. You may have also heard about something called psychographics. Did anyone here ever complete a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, one of those online personality questionnaires, those quizzes? Yeah, because everyone, they were like, find out whether you're neurotic or not, or find out what sort of personality. And because we are all such narcissists, we all had to fill these bloody things out. What many of us didn't realize is what we were in fact filling out was a standardized ocean survey designed by psychologists, been around for several years, which asks you between 50 and 100 questions to elicit your precise personality on something known as an ocean score. Ocean stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And all of us, each of us here, has of course a completely unique personality, but we all lie somewhere on each of those 5 personality domains. So think for a second about where you might be on that. Now, what Cambridge Analytica was doing, or through a secondary company called GSR, was to correlate the answers of your ocean survey with your Facebook likes to try to work out the patterns, the correlation between the two. And once they built up a good enough model, they could determine people's ocean scores based only on their Facebook likes. So maybe a few 100,000 people filled in this survey, but then with that data, they could make a personality prediction for all 250 million Americans. The idea being that if you are I know Eric, for example, I know he's a very neurotic young man, so he's going to get an advert that with that knowledge, we can target him with an advert that plays to the fact he's fearful about guns or whatever, he's going to get an advert for that. You over here, sir, I know you're a very agreeable person. I've seen your personality score. You're going to get one that's way more uplifting. And each of us will receive a completely different advert based on our unique personality drivers, what really motivates us. That's what they tried to do. Problem is, at the moment, there is no evidence that they actually used that in the Trump campaign, and there's no evidence that any of it actually works anyway. So I don't think they did that. I didn't think it was important. What was important was a far simpler set of techniques. They took their 250 million data points, 5,000 data points on 250 million Americans, took them over to the US, sat down with the Republican Party data analysts, cross-referenced their data sets against something known as voter vault, which is the Republican Party's enormous, decades-long data sets about voters, and tried to identify what they called as persuadables. The people that they thought were on the fence, the people that voted for Reagan but not for George W. Bush, the people that they thought could be persuaded to vote for Donald Trump. They found 13.5 million of those people. They then, with Cambridge Analytica's data set, worked out what motivated them, what they cared about, what they were interested with, and found that they believed, anyway, Cambridge Analytica, that there were just about enough persuadables in especially 3 key swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, to be able to swing the election. Everyone else said it was impossible. They thought the data said it was doable. And they relentlessly targeted those persuadable voters in those 3 swing states especially, TV adverts as well as Facebook adverts. And when the election results came out, Donald Trump had won each of those swing states by less than 1 percentage point. He used Facebook way better than Hillary Clinton did. I think he won Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. Now, so I think they were really important. But I think the key thing here is they were doing stuff that most political parties are doing in the US or elsewhere. It's not magic. This, I think, is, in a sense, more worrying. It's more worrying because it's become so normal. There are dozens of companies doing exactly the same. The question I think we should be considering now is not whether an election was stolen, not whether you can also, of course, worry about that. But what is this doing to how elections are won and lost? If someone had told me in 1997, when it was the first time I could vote, that in 20 years' time, elections will be fought over personalised data sets from thousands of different data points collected from all sorts of different places, designed to create a model about what you care about and then target you with an advert through a free social media platform called Facebook. I'm telling you, in 1997, that sounded like madness. I want you to consider what might things be like in 20 years from now on the current trajectory. Forget about today. What happens when our Fitbits, our baby monitors, our TVs, our smart fridges, everything in our smart home is all connected up to the great Internet of Things and is all collecting data about us? Where's that going? Does anyone believe that a politician would not use your fridge data if they thought it might give them a chance of targeting you with a slightly better message? I'm telling you, you're going to open your smart fridge and Donald Trump's going to pop up just as you're going to get, because you're slightly hungry, and we know that you're hungry, and we know that when you're hungry you're angry, and we know that when you're angry you're more likely to be open to a message from a candidate that's tough on law and order. You open your fridge at 5:30 and up pops a hologram of Donald Trump. Slightly more likely for you to be open to that message than you would have been 1 hour ago. That sounds ludicrous. It doesn't sound as ludicrous as it would have sounded in 1997 if someone had told me what is happening today. So think about that. And rather than worry about a single election, imagine what this is doing to elections in general. One of the reasons I think that elections have become so contested, so bitter, so divisive, and people questioning the results is because they believe that the other side has cheated, because they don't believe that the regulators are on top of things. And if the vote had gone the other way, whether it was Brexit or whether it was Hillary Clinton winning, the other side would have said exactly the same. Donald Trump supporters would have said, but Hillary Clinton was using personal data to target voters and we don't know what she was saying. Both sides are going to use this argument because both sides don't believe that the regulators are checking it. You know, during the European Union referendum, that some of the Leave campaigners were doing targeted adverts on Facebook telling people that the European Union is trying to stop British people from drinking cups of tea. What's going on? No wonder the result was 52-48. So this is one problem. This is that the results become contested because the regulators can't stay on top of it. It also, I think, slowly turns elections increasingly into a data science. Who's got the best data sets? Who can do the best data analysis? Who can find the vulnerable emotional touch points that's most likely to sway somebody? Not about a big public argument where everyone gets to see what everyone else is seeing and we thrash out the issues of the day, but personalized, targeted messages. What happens, for example, when in a decade's time, and I guarantee this is happening because you only need to look at ad tech to know, each person receives a completely unique message to them and them alone. How do you hold a politician to account that sends 1 million messages to 1 million different people, 1 million different messages to 1 million different people? And does this, in the end, even change the sort of politician that will be successful? Is the politician that's most liable, most likely, most talented at being non-committal and vague, so that an automated, generated machine is able to produce any kind of nonsense coming out of their mouth using an automated system that's targeted to that person? Is that not going to become the sort of candidate? I mean, every single politician, in some senses, is a reflection of the technology through which they reach people. So this is the problem. It's not just about one election. It's about how elections are changing generally. And I see this as a kind of a metaphor, really, for the entire way we do politics today. In a very simple sort of way of describing it, is that we have a very old set of institutions, an old set of norms, an old set of laws, regulations that were designed for a very different world. Suddenly we have this brand new way of doing politics, and the two things don't work very well together. And many of the problems we see are a reflection of that tension. And there's all sorts of other things beyond elections, but this is an example I sometimes give, which is, I don't know whether any of you, there's a few of you in here that's old enough to remember when we used to get our photographs developed at Boots. I can see some of you, Nods of remembrance when we used to have to go on holiday and then we'd take our 25 photos with our Kodak camera and we'd bring them back and we'd pay $5.99 to get these 25 rubbish photos back from Boots. And there was no way of, I mean, they were all overexposed, they were underexposed, they were terrible, and you had no way of changing them. Our whole lives as citizens is still essentially like going to Boots. That's how politics still works. Our lives as consumers is now Instagram. It's instant, it's changeable, it's free, we can send it to anyone, we can redo it, we can edit it, we can filter it, whatever we want. The two things just don't work very well together anymore. And so our great job, yes, of course, there's a lot of problems with how technology incentives are structured, but partly it's on democracy to upgrade, to change, to think about what it needs to do to still stay in touch with how people live their lives as consumers, because you cannot have a system of government that is so wildly out of sync with how people live their everyday lives. But this isn't to say we should rush headlong into some god-awful direct democracy. It's how do we improve the system that we have carefully, thoughtfully, keeping the good bits and discarding the bad bits. And there's no good just moaning and whinging about Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. I mean, it's fun to moan about those people too. But this is something that's much bigger than that. It's about an incompatibility problem between our norms, our rules, our regulations, and how our lives are lived. So that's one thing as citizens we have to, yes, lobby for and change the way things work. Ironically enough, when it comes to Cambridge Analytica, I think this is the easiest thing to solve. I really don't think it's so difficult to demand, as the Electoral Commission is now demanding, and the Information Commission's Office is now demanding, that every single online advert that every political party ever uses has to be published and in real time, and with who has been targeted by those adverts. Yeah, it's going to be a really long and boring Excel spreadsheet, but someone's going to go through it, and someone's going to make sure that people stay honest with it. We can fix that problem. There are other ones that are a lot harder than this, ironically enough, because everyone talks about Cambridge Analytica, but I think that's the easy bit. But a final word, because this is also about digital citizens, a final word. Am I doing okay? Have I got time for a final word? Final word. Final word. We citizens have to also understand that we are in some ways culpable. We are in some ways responsible for this state of affairs. It's our clicks, our shares, our swipes, our willingness to trade almost everything for convenience that has got us where we are today. We are feeding all of these systems. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to give up Google because you said, oh, Google's too big. It's a monopoly. I'm really worried about what it's going to, it's now the biggest lobbyist in Washington. I'm really worried about its size. I'm not going to use Google today. And then literally 5 minutes later, after using another search engine, you're back on Google because it's so much better. Nothing's going to change if that's what we do, because these systems only improve if other people use them. And if we only ever use the ones that are most convenient and easiest for us, and we trade everything, our privacy and everything else for convenience, then nothing will change. So my final word for you is to appreciate and understand your own complicity in all of this. Me too, I'm as bad as anybody else. I'm not lecturing at you. Technically I am, but I am saying it back to myself to motivate myself to do this, is to therefore at least be conscious that the choices we make with our clicks and our swipes and our data sharing, they matter. And the ones we make now, especially how things are changing, matter more than ever. And so with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand over to the panel.